Welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see that website right there, Panther-Lair.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting, all at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, message boards where you can talk with other Pitt fans about what's going on. I mean, all the things that we talk about here on the Morning Pitt or we talk about on the live Panther-Lair show on Wednesday nights, a lot of times those post-game conversations, I mean, so much of it is kind of inspired by the message boards or informed by the message boards. You know, sometimes I'll go into the live Wednesday night show or one of these Morning Pitt episodes and say to myself, well, what are the fans talking about right now? What are fans interested in right now? And I'll go check the boards and see what topics are really getting a lot of traction, and then we'll carry some of those conversations over. Or maybe I'll just look at something and think, oh, that's an interesting topic. Let's talk about that. And so, you know, if you want the sort of the bright sun at the center of it all, it's the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. And I don't know if anyone has ever described the message boards as the bright sun at the center of it all, but that's really what it is. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. It's the best online community for Pitt sports fans that you're going to find. And then kind of as an offshoot of the site, we have this right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where we do these morning Pitt videos Monday through Friday, every morning, just to give you sort of a start to your day on Pitt conversation topics, what I'm thinking about on the day, what news or anything like that. We talk about it right here for 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes, however long it takes, just to get through whatever topics are relevant. Yesterday, we talked a lot about Pitt's offensive identity. Today, we're going to talk about some other things. A couple of things we want to talk about today. Well, each day, we're going to have different things to talk about. It might be football. It might be basketball. It might be recruiting. There's any number of items that we can discuss right here on the Morning Pitt, and we will. I think it's sort of your morning update show. We used to do the once a week. Every Monday, we did the weekend recap, where we just kind of run down anything that happened over the weekend. We did that over the summer, and then just sort of turned it into something much bigger here, going 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, with this Morning Pitt. Of course, you might forget that we release these. You might not see it on social media or on Panther-Lair.com. Hit that subscribe button right there, and you will and turn on notifications, and then you'll get an alert sent to your phone so you know when we post a new Morning Pitt video. You also get an alert sent when we go live on Wednesday nights for the Panther-Lair show every Wednesday night at 8:30 right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And you will also get an alert when we go live for our post-game shows, which we will do, this Georgia Tech game starting at 8 o'clock is going to be a late one. I think the West Virginia game started at 7:30, and we were going live around 1 or 1:30 in the morning. It's going to be around there for this Georgia Tech game. Hopefully it's a quick one, and I think there's a decent chance it might be. We'll talk about strategies and approach and how Pitt's going to go at this Georgia Tech game later in the week. But let me just say this. In the last two games, Georgia Tech gave up 600 rushing yards, 316, I think, to Ole Miss 2 weeks ago, and then 284 to UCF this past weekend. 600 rushing yards. So while I think we all want to see Pitt air it out, we all want to see Keaton Slovis throw to Konate Mumfield and Bub Means and see what this passing game is really capable of, pretty sure they're going to be running the ball a lot in this game until Georgia Tech shows that they can stop it. Now, I'm all for a run-heavy attack on an 8 o'clock game, because that means that clock is going to keep rolling. This game on Saturday, this past weekend, Rhode Island, it was 3 hours and 1 minute. Beautiful. After the first two games of the season, West Virginia and Tennessee each took 4 hours. And then Western Michigan, you cut it back down to about 3.5. This Rhode Island game was 3 hours and 1 minute. Love it. Would love to see something similar to that on Saturday night against Georgia Tech. I'm not sure if we'll get it, but I think Pitt is absolutely going to try to establish the run, given what Georgia Tech has given up so far this season, particularly in the last two games on the ground. But we'll talk more about that as the week goes on. It's Tuesday. That means it's the day after Pitt released its weekly game notes, and it's updated too deep for the week. And so I figured we can talk about that, because the depth chart actually had some changes this week. Actually had some notable changes. Some changes that, by God, almost reflect what we actually see on the field. And, it's sort of a weekly challenge of talking about the depth chart and writing about the depth chart. We publish an updated depth chart on Panther-Lair.com every Tuesday, based on the two deep that Pitt releases, because we figure you should know what they're putting out there, what official two deep they are releasing. But we always do it with the caveat that this is the officially released two deep and often bears very little connection to the reality on the field. And still, there are people who feel the need to point out that that's not what they actually do. That's not who they actually play or the depth chart that the coaches actually use in the games, which is the truth. They leave injured players on the depth chart. They put oars where there's no need to be an oar. Israel Abanikanda and Rodney Hammond have been an oar on the depth chart since the West Virginia game. They were on an oar on the depth chart prior to the Tennessee game. They were an oar on the depth chart prior to the Western Michigan game, and they were an oar on the depth chart prior to the Rhode Island game, all largely as a reflection on the play of Rodney Hammond in that West Virginia season opener. Never mind the fact that he got hurt in the West Virginia season opener and hasn't played in any game since then. Well, they've smiled upon us. But no, this is not the point where I'll say the heavens have smiled upon us. The depth chart gods have smiled upon us in a way that I will get to in a second when we switch to defense. But as it relates to the running backs, you now have Israel Abanikanda listed as your starter, Rodney Hammond listed second, or Vincent Davis, or Sibo Flemister. It at least looks a little bit closer to what we've seen on the field. Mostly because Rodney Hammond hasn't been playing for the last 4 weeks. And I really don't think he's going to play against Georgia Tech is my guess. We'll see what happens. But with Israel Abanikanda busting out 100-yard games in each of the last 3 weeks, currently sitting at the top of the ACC rushing chart with like 479 yards, and basically, making history, rushing for 4 touchdowns in a game, having the first 3-game streak of 100-yard rushing performances in 5 years at Pitt. You can understand why he would be listed by himself, in addition to the guy who was his co-starter being hurt and not playing. But it makes sense that they would go with Abanikanda in that position. That was the only real change on offense. But the defense had a few changes, and those changes ended up being actually relevant because the coaches removed Nate Temple, defensive end, redshirt junior defensive end, and removed junior cornerback Rashad Battle from the depth chart. They'd been on the depth chart this season, and they are no longer on it. And Pat Narduzzi made the announcement on Monday that both guys are out for the season. Now, Narduzzi always claims that he will tell us when a player is out for the season. He's not going to give injury details, but if someone's done for the year, he will announce it. And he made good on his word, at least as it relates to Nate Temple and Rashad Battle on Monday, announcing that both guys are out for the season. Now, Nate Temple got hurt during the Western Michigan game. He played in that game, but came out with an injury. I think he had his arm in a sling, but I think that's what I saw on TV. And that really cut into the defensive end depth. All right, because that was a game, they went into that Western Michigan game. They already didn't have Deslin Alexander or Dayon Hayes. Hayes didn't make the trip. Alexander traveled but did not play. Haba Baldonado came out with an injury during the game. Nate Temple came out with an injury during the game. And so they were really running thin at that position. You come into this Rhode Island game, Temple still didn't play. Hayes was still out. Alexander didn't play, and Baldonado didn't play. So your defensive end depth, your 4-man rotation, your top 4 defensive ends for the Rhode Island game were John Morgan, who is a starter or a co-starter, and then Bam Brima, who's maybe 3rd team, Chris Maloney, who's probably 4th team, and sophomore or redshirt freshman, Nakai Johnson, who is also a 4th team defensive end. And that was your primary rotation of defensive ends for that Rhode Island game. And that's a problem. Now, I think they're going to get Baldonado back soon. I would expect him to play against Georgia Tech. I think they should get Alexander back sooner rather than later. If not Georgia Tech, and I kind of think he's going to play this week. If he doesn't, I imagine he'll be back for Virginia Tech. So they'll be able to fill out that depth a little bit better. If you get both of those guys back, you can go Morgan and Baldonado to start with Alexandra and Bambrima, who played a lot against Rhode Island, and those were valuable snaps for him for sure. He played a lot at Western Michigan as well. If that's your top 4, you can work with that. You don't want to lose any more. You don't want to have any more guys go down. You don't want to test the depth any more than you already have. But that's a workable top 4 that you can deal with. Rashad Battle going out is interesting as well, and it kind of coincides with an actual shakeup on the 2 deep at cornerback, because previously you had AJ Woods and Marquez Williams listed as the starters on the 2 deep. Well, this week you've got MJ Devonshire and Marquez Williams listed as the starters. And Devonshire has played better than Woods. I mean, at least to the naked, untrained eye from the press box, it looks like Devonshire's had a better season thus far than Woods has. Williams is your solid, reliable starter. He got a little banged up at Western Michigan and didn't play against Rhode Island. I would expect him to be back. But Williams is your reliable starter, the guy that you know is going to be out there all the time. Woods and Devonshire were in the competition for that other starting spot, and it seemed like that Woods had won the job coming out of training camp. Devonshire has been better, though. I think Woods has not been as bad as it may look, but he has gotten beat on plays. I don't think there's any question about that. And so it makes sense to put Devonshire into that starting spot. And I would expect that, the actual alignment on Saturday to reflect that, to have Devonshire as one of the starting corners opposite Marquez Williams. So they made that switch, and then they took Rashad Battle out of the mix as well. And so you end up with, Marquez Williams backed up by Noah Bigelow, who incidentally I don't think actually played on Saturday at defensive back. Ryland Gandy and Javante Royal were kind of the main guys, it seemed like, behind A.J. Woods and M.J. Devonshire. But they put Bigelow behind Marquez Williams on the depth chart, and then A.J. Woods and Ryland Gandy behind M.J. Devonshire on the depth chart at cornerback. The biggest change for me that they made on the two deep this week was at outside linebacker, where Tyler Wiltz is listed as the backup star linebacker. That's the field side linebacker, the wide side of the field. And Solomon DeShields is listed as the backup money linebacker. That plays to the boundary behind Shane Simon. Why do I care about this? Because all season they've listed it wrong. All season they've listed DeShields as the backup to Kamara, to Bengali Kamara at star linebacker, and they listed Tyler Wiltz as the backup to Shane Simon at money linebacker. All season they've listed that on the first however many 4 depth charts of the season, pre-West Virginia, pre-Tennessee, pre-Western Michigan, pre-Rhode Island. They listed them that way. And in every single game, Wiltz has backed up Kamara at star, and DeShields has backed up Simon at money. They've had them flipped in the way they list them in the depth chart. Nobody cares except me, but it bugged me every single week. Finally, they changed it this week. They actually made it reflect what they're doing on the field. Now, I can only assume that this means that DeShields will come out and be the backup star linebacker this week, and Wiltz will be the backup money linebacker, and it'll look on the field the way the depth chart listed it for the first 4 weeks of the season. But at least for this week, these days until the actual game, I'll be able to rest easy knowing that the outside linebackers, the backup outside linebackers, are properly listed on the depth chart. That means a lot to me. One other switch on the depth chart, it's at the in the special teams group, and they listed M.J. Devonshire as an or starter with Konate Mumfield. Mumfield has been the listed starter, punt returner all season. Obviously, after M.J. Devonshire had a punt return for a touchdown, they decided to put him as an or with Konate Mumfield. Look, my thoughts on punt return, and I've said this a lot over the years, when it comes to punt return, just catch the ball. Just catch the ball. I kind of don't care if you can do anything with it. It's exciting to watch M.J. Devonshire return that punt. It's been exciting to watch other punt returns over the years. There's no question about it. Just put someone back there who will catch the ball. Take a fair catch every time. Unless you have such an obvious extreme example like M.J. Devonshire's punt return the other day, where it was very clearly outkicked the coverage, and there was a lot of room to run and a lot of space to work with, and it made sense for Devonshire to try to return it. Otherwise, wave your arm, catch the ball, and let the offense do its job. Your job is just to catch the ball. Don't try to do anything more than that. But that's just me. I don't know if I'm risk averse in my life, but certainly when it comes to punt returns, I am. So those are the depth chart updates. Those are the depth chart changes. Personnel-wise, you saw a lot of guys you haven't seen much of before in that Rhode Island game. I mean, I talked about some of the guys on the defensive line. Nakai Johnson playing a ton. Sam Williams got snaps out there. Chris Maloney was out. Bam Brima played more than he ever has. In the secondary, you saw a lot of Javon McIntyre. McIntyre actually took over for Rashad Battle in that extra defensive back position in the Delta defense, the third down defense, where they pull defensive linemen off and bring out an extra safety. Mostly last year it was John Patrician. This year it's been Rashad Battle, but Javon McIntyre stepped into that role. on Saturday against Rhode Island, and that seems like that's his job now. He also played a lot as the backup boundary safety behind Brandon Hill. PJ O'Brien played a lot as the backup field safety behind Eric Hallett. Like I say, Rylan Gandy and Javante Royal got a lot of snaps at cornerback, or a decent amount of snaps at cornerback. You saw Branson Taylor get a lot of work at left tackle. Gabe Hoy got his first playing time of the season. They did work a lot of guys in, particularly on defense in that game. Pat Narduzzi said they used 27 players on defense against Rhode Island, and you run down that list, and there were a lot of players you haven't seen much of. So that was good experience for those guys. But now they need to tighten it up. Now they're going to need to get as many guys healthy as they can, and they're going to need to tighten up and get ready for ACC play. Speaking of ACC play, let's take a quick look around the Coastal this weekend because, well, wasn't a very good week in the Coastal Division. As a matter of fact, let's start with the one team in the Coastal Division that won this weekend. Your Pitt Panthers. Pitt was the only team in the Coastal Division to win this past weekend. And, I mean, not coincidentally, they were the only team in the Coastal Division to play an FCS opponent. So 45-24, Pitt wins that game and improves to 3-1. The rest of the division, I mean, you start on Thursday night. West Virginia got spanked by West Virginia. Virginia Tech got spanked by West Virginia at home, 33-10. Virginia on Friday night, 22-20 loss at Syracuse on a last-minute field goal. To which I asked the question, we've all been wondering, is Syracuse good? Is Syracuse good? Syracuse might be good. They're 4-0. Well, you don't want to sort of you don't want to say, well, you didn't beat that team by enough, or you didn't look good against a bad team, so now I don't know. But the reality is Virginia looks really bad this year. Virginia looks like it might be, I mean, shout out to Jeff Collins, but it might be, maybe the worst team in the Coastal. The Virginia Georgia Tech game is going to be a real slog. It's going to remind me of that Virginia Tech Boston College game a couple weeks ago where you just said somebody has to win because Virginia's bad. And so for Syracuse at home to need a last-minute field goal to beat Virginia by 2 in a 22-20 game makes me a little curious about Syracuse. The Orange actually play Wagner this weekend, so you think they'll get to 5-0. But then they just have, I don't want to call it a murderer's row, but I mean, their next 5 or 6 opponents, I mean, they have Wake Forest, NC State, Clemson, I think Florida State, Notre Dame, and Pitt, I think are their next 6 opponents. I mean, you could realistically go from 5-0 to, whatever you want, 6-5, or realistically 5-6, or 7-4, or something like that. I mean, they might go 2-4 over that stretch, or 3-3 at best, because that is a challenging stretch of games coming up for Syracuse. So, for Orange fans who are not watching this podcast, enjoy the 5-0, and we'll see where you're at when you get to the end of November, because that's a real challenge. But as far as Virginia goes, they're in pretty rough shape. Miami, you talk about teams being in rough shape. Somebody said that I wore my, I don't know if you can tell that this is orange and green, my Miami flannel today in honor of, Miami just tanking on Saturday. 45-31 loss to Middle Tennessee. Gave up 408 passing yards to Middle Tennessee and benched Tyler Van Dyke. Van Dyke was 16 of 32 for a $138, 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. And the thing is, I said before the season, we always hype Miami. We always talk about Miami. Miami's always going to get those first place votes just for being Miami. And I said, well, the difference this year might be that they finally have a real quarterback. That didn't work out. And then you benched him. You in 2022, if you have a star quarterback that you're going to build around for another year or so, you can't bench him. You can't. First of all, he's your best chance. He gives you the best chance to win, and by benching him, you're not giving yourself the best chance to win no matter how poorly he's played. And then you're running the chance of losing him. And that has to be a consideration. But Van Dyke gets benched, Miami gives up 400 passing yards, and they lose to Middle Tennessee by 2 touchdowns at home in front of dozens of distraught Miami fans. Duke, dream is over, 3-0, but they lose at Kansas 35-27. They are now 3-1. North Carolina, just defense is just terrible, maybe one of the best offenses in the Coastal, and absolutely the worst defense in the Coastal. It's kind of the flip of Virginia Tech, where they've got, probably maybe the best defense in the Coastal and absolutely the worst offense in the Coastal. Carolina loses by 2 scores to Notre Dame, 45-32. Tar Heels are now 3-1. And then Georgia Tech in the Jeff Collins swan song, 27-10 loss at Central Florida, gave up 284 rushing yards. They dropped to 1-3 overall, and that's the end of the Jeff Collins era at Georgia Tech. Collins wins 10 games in 3+ seasons with the Yellow Jackets, 10-28 record overall, 7-19 in the ACC. He never beat Pitt, never even coached a game in Pittsburgh. Pat Narduzzi sort of bemoaned that fact. He wished that Jeff Collins had gotten a chance to coach a game in Pittsburgh, but due to the changed schedule of the COVID year, 2020, Pitt played at Georgia Tech in 2019, Collins' first year. And then also, when they switched the schedule around for 2020, Pitt went down to Atlanta again, and then, of course, played down there last season. Pitt won all 3 of those, and Jeff Collins will never get a chance to coach a game at Heinz Field or Acrisure Stadium, at least as the head coach at Georgia Tech. Who knows what his Phoenix Rising moment will be, but for now, Jeff Collins is out. And so that's obviously another storyline for this weekend's game. Georgia Tech coming in without its head coach, or without Jeff Collins at least, and see where the Yellow Jackets go from there. So, I mean, now as you sit in the Coastal, Pitt, Duke, and Carolina are all 3-1 overall. Virginia Tech, Miami, and Virginia are 2-2 overall. Georgia Tech is 1-3 overall. Only 3 of the teams in the Coastal played ACC games. Virginia Tech beat Boston College. Virginia lost to Syracuse this past weekend, and Georgia Tech lost to Clemson in the season opener. At the whatever they call it, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So they're 0-1, Virginia's 0-1, and Virginia Tech is 1-0. All those records are going to get changed this weekend. Miami is off, but everybody else in the Coastal plays against a Coastal opponent. So you're going to all of a sudden see a bunch of wins and losses pop up on the board as we really dive headlong into conference play. And this is when the games really do matter. And Pitt's going to start it off with a Georgia Tech program that is, quite frankly, reeling. Panthers are, three score favorites over Georgia Tech, seen anywhere around -18 to -20, which is crazy for a conference game, but I think it reflects somewhat on Pitt's program and a whole lot on Georgia Tech's program in the state of the Yellow Jackets right now. All right, as we move through the week, we'll keep breaking down that matchup. Pitt, Georgia Tech. We'll have some basketball talk as Jeff Capel's program gets underway for the first, this is the first official week of practice for the 2022-2023 season. We'll have recruiting updates as Pitt got a commitment over the weekend. And we'll have lots of, we'll recap the month of September, get you ready for the weekend games to watch in the ACC, in the Coastal, and around the top 25. We're really diving in now. This is the real season now, and we're in it. And it's something to... it's fun because the games really do matter and they really do count. There's a before and after moment coming up here, and it just so happens to be on October 1st where it's real now. And so we're definitely going to have a lot to talk about right here on the Morning Pit. Thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. Make sure you stay tuned at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. To never miss a Morning Pit Monday through Friday. Never miss any of our live streams on Wednesday night or our post-game show or any of our other exclusive Pit video content that we put out. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Thanks again for checking it out. Appreciate it. Hope you had a great Monday. Hope you have a great Tuesday. And we will talk to you again on Wednesday morning with the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.